The beginning of the movie takes place during the Alaskan Gold Rush. The mainland U.S. is home to a big dog by the name of Buck. He is unruly, spoiled, disruptive, and most importantly, clumsy. He is made to sleep outside as a kind of punishment after devouring all the food at a feast hosted by his master, Judge Miller. He gets kidnapped by a thief while there, who then sells the dog to traders. In order to sell Buck as a sled dog, the dealers ship him up to Alaska. At the port in Alaska, Buck meets John Thornton for the first time and gives him his harmonica back after it accidentally falls out of his pocket. The Postal Service employee Perrault purchases him after that. The dog sled team that Perrault and his wife Francois used to travel into the Alaskan wilderness to deliver the mail now includes Buck. Buck starts out clumsy and overwhelmed. Buck and the other dogs experience abuse at the hands of the sled dog's leader, Spitz. However, Buck quickly grows to like his new life and starts connecting with his untamed wolf-like nature portrayed as a giant black wolf. By being polite to the other sled dogs, Buck wins their respect. He also wins the hearts of his new owners when he saves Francois from falling through the ice of a frozen lake. To reclaim his position as leader, Spitz decides to fight Buck, but Buck fully embraces his wild side and defeats Spitz. Spitz, humiliated by his loss, goes off into the forest. Perrault and Francois complete their first ever on-time delivery under Buck's leadership as the leader of the sled dogs. John's hometown is the last destination. Buck keeps them from leaving long enough for John to give Perrault a note from his wife. Buck adores his new owners and his band of dogs, but Perrault and Francois are fired when the telegraph takes the place of their services. They must sell their pets in order to get back to Canada. The dogs are sold to Hal, a vile individual. Hal plans to venture into the bush with his buddies Mercedes and Charles in hopes of striking it rich by discovering gold. They are totally unprepared for the difficulties of wilderness survival. Hal and his companions leave despite John's attempts to stop them from doing so. John follows them in an effort to persuade them to turn back after realizing that summer will arrive earlier than predicted, which will render the sled dogs worthless over the non-snowy terrain. When he comes up to them, he discovers that Buck has passed out and the other dogs are famished. Hal and his companions are unable to convince them to continue on their adventure, but he is permitted to bring Buck back to town with him. While Buck is recovering, John's past is made known. He and his wife became estranged after the small son they had died. John traveled to Alaska to escape his pain and frequently drank his sorrows away. Later, Hal makes his way back into town, where he runs across John drinking in a pub and hits him. Hal claims that John is trying to ruin his efforts since he hasn't found any gold and has lost all of his dogs in the bush. Hal is expelled from the tavern by the locals after Buck interrupts to defend John, his new master. Buck burying John's vodka in the snow at home. After he has regained consciousness, John informs Buck that the reason he traveled to Alaska was to fulfill his son's obsession with seeing the state and exploring an unexplored region of it. Now sober and with Buck by his side, John makes the decision to travel into unexplored territory in memory of his son. He and Buck make it through a perilous wilderness canoe voyage. They choose to stay in a long-forgotten cottage they locate. Hal, meantime, discovers that John and Buck have left and start looking for them. John starts gold panning after learning that the river near his cottage is rich in metal. When Buck spots a female white wolf in the woods, he starts following her. Following Buck's successful attempt to save a pack member from drowning, the pack starts to accept Buck as a member of the pack. Buck stays with John every night despite spending the entire day with the wolves. As a result of finding solace for his tormented spirit, John decides the decision to go back to his house and attempt to save his former life. Additionally, he acknowledges that Buck has discovered his true home among the wolves. Hal shows up on John's final night in the wilderness and challenges him with a loaded rifle. Hal manages to shoot John after much scuffle, after which he demands the gold. Hal receives all the gold that John had amassed, but he isn't content until both John and Buck are gone. Hearing gunfire that night, Buck, who had left with the wolf pack, runs back to John. With the club, Hal attempted to frighten Buck, but the dog overcame his fear and took the club from him. Hal is subsequently pushed into the flaming cabin by Buck, and the building immediately falls on top of him. Buck rushes to support a critically injured John. Before passing away from his wound, he had one final glimpse at the meadow with Buck. John narrates that Buck has since become a legend to the audience. He has taken over as the pack's leader and mated with the white wolf to produce pups. However, he tells the crowd that Buck is a genuine dog. Every now and then, Buck passes the burned-out cabin and thinks of his pal.